My name is Becca Clark, and I am the student recruiter for Thunderbird's master's degrees here. And if you have any questions regarding one of these degrees, I've put my contact information at the top of the chat. A few housekeeping details. We will be sharing the recording of this presentation as well as the slides in a few days once we've uploaded them to our website. So you will have access to those in a few days, and I'll send out an email with all of the details. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box at the bottom. I will ask Gina at the end of her presentation to address any questions there. And the chat is really reserved for any extra questions are not related to the presentation. Thank you everyone for joining us. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Gina Delgado, Senior Program Coordinator of Thunderbird's online programs. Thank you, Gina.
Hi, hey everybody. My name is Gina Delgado, as she said, and today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I perceive the world since I am a millennial. I'm assuming we have a lot of millennials in house today, and I want to talk to you a little bit more about how skills that are slightly unconventional and how they kind of translate to conventional. So I might ask a couple questions in the middle of the PowerPoint presentation. So you can put that into the chat once I give you the question. So I want to give you an overview. First, we're going to talk about the fourth industrial revolution. Change is here. Oh my goodness, everyone feels a little scared. And what does this talk about, the fourth industrial revolution that everyone's talking about? Well, I'm going to go a little bit in depth on it and how it affects us here at Thunderbird and also organizations and businesses across the world. Second, I want to talk about my hustle. My hustle is my hashtag millennial perspective and how I've created unconventional skills to apply to conventional situations. Third, I want to go into creativity and improvisation and how this is actually part of our everyday lives. And it helps with capacity building, intelligence, and collaboration. And lastly, I'd like to talk about adaptive leadership. I like to call it rebel leadership because I think being a rebel is awesome, but it's unexpected and it's necessary. First, Dr. Tom Hunsaker, Dean of Innovation here at Thunderbird, gave me a quote that I thought was really insightful. It says, different is not better, different is not the same as better. And to think about that a little more, just like generations before us, millennials have experienced world-changing events while we were children. And we're the generation that have experienced social shifts from major events like 9/11 and the market crash and Hurricane Katrina, Columbine, and a lot of others. But the Pew Research Center in 2019 have indicated that millennials have brought more racial and ethnic diversity. When the silent generation was young, 84% were non-Hispanic white. This change is driven partly by the growing number of Hispanic and Asian immigrants whose ranks have increased since the boomer generation. And the increased prevalence of interracial marriage and differences in fertility patterns have also contributed to the country's shifting racial ethnic makeup. Millennial women, just like Generation X, which are right before us, are more likely to interact with tougher workplaces than prior generations. And that's what makes us millennials feed off of that energy. We exist in such a place where there's a lot of change, and we are entering a workforce where there's a lot of diversity and competition. So not only do millennials need to be different, but we need to be better as well. Now, the fourth industrial revolution, we try to encompass this at Thunderbird, but from my perspective, I think it's extremely important to talk about its possibilities. Klaus Schwab from 2017, who's the person who coined this term, says that the three reasons that underpin his conviction that a fourth and distinct revolution is underway is that, one, there's velocity. So contrary to the previous revolutions, the 4IR is what I'm going to call it, is exponential rather than linear. Number two, there's breadth and depth. It builds on a digital revolution and combines multiple technologies which lead to unprecedented paradigm shifts in the economy and business and society and the individual. And three, systems and impact. The 4IR involves the transformation of entire systems across and within countries, companies, industries, and society. So when you look at this, that's a lot to take in. And what it basically goes down to is there's this fusion of the physical, the digital, and the biological worlds that we have right now. There's a wearable technology, I have a microphone, there's the camera, but it's that constant interaction that's starting to change how we approach problem solving. There's also adapt and perish. So businesses and organizations need to step up their game in order to adapt to this technological singularity that's happening. It's happening so fast that we need to react faster. And also, organizations and companies have to get jobs ready, basically get ready for jobs that don't exist, to grow employee skills in unexpected combinations to prepare as best possible, because that's all you can do. Now, let's look at this. Everyone remembers news. News came in a bunch of different ways. Typewriters, if you look at both of the pictures, typewriters are a reification of previous mechanical technology for communication. And similar technologies come from as early as the 1500s, where Italian printmaker Francesco Ramposetto invented scrittura tattile, hopefully I said that right, to imprint on letters on paper. But it wasn't up until 1823 through 1829 that we start seeing typewriters. The evolution of that technology coincided with many societal events. In comparison, now the news isn't typewritten, it's written through a computer. And the news went from print to digital. Think about the time span from Francesco Ramposetto's innovation all the way to 1823. That is hundreds of years. But then we go from 1900 to now, and within 100 years, the news has been reified in plenty of different ways, from newspapers to TV to blogs. And so that's where the word blog comes from. It comes from weblog, and people just kind of ran with the word blog. It's used as personal journals, originally as like a journal application through sites like livejournal.com and Zanga.com. But now blogs are sources of news and commercial information. And it's easy to post your opinion, your research, and anything that you find important just to the rest of the world with one click. So if we just kind of take in all the information I just said, we go from predictable to unpredictable. A lot of situations have gone from organized to colorful chaos. And the technological singularity, or the exponential evolution of technology and how we interact with it, is starting to take shape and manifest itself through those tenets that Schwab has listed. And the workforce that take the brunt of the fourth industrial revolution is partly Gen X, but mostly millennials. So let's talk a little bit more about millennials. I mean, it's strange because I'm one myself, but I see a lot of differences, and that's always going to be the case with each generation. Here's an overview of the timeline of the workplace. I referred to the silent and the traditionalists, and those people were born before 1946. Then we have the baby boomers from 1946 to 1964. Then we have Gen X from 1965 to 1976, millennials from 77 to 97, and then we have Gen 2020, who were born after 1998. So coming up in 2020, we're going to have 5 generations in the workplace, and that's a lot of experience, that's a lot of social change, that's a lot of beliefs and approaches to beliefs. that have not been together under one roof. In 1994, the percentage of US labor workforce, according to the Pew Research Center in 2018, said that there was 21% silent traditionalist, boomers at 50%, and Gen X was at 30%. In 2017, now we have 5 different generations in the workforce. Silent and traditionalists are at 2%, boomers are at 25%, Gen X at 33%, Millennials at 35%, and Gen 2020 coming in at 5%. And so let's start to think about millennials and the types of, I guess, stigmas that millennials have had to deal with. And every generation before that has definitely had to deal with as well. But now with this technological singularity, that is, those are opinions that get to grow a little bit more. Millennials aren't job hopping any faster than Generation X. That was the title of an article that I read from the Pew Research Institute. And it gives a different view of millennials based on actual data. While the majority perceive that millennials job hop a tremendous amount and expect to be managers and leaders within a year of their start date, the data suggests otherwise. So those who are from 18 to 35 are just as likely to stick with their employers as their older counterparts in Generation X. And in fact, the college-educated millennials have a longer track record with their employers than Generation X did back in 2000. So we have a longer track record at our places of employment. I've been at ASU for about 8 years. Higher education attainment. So we have higher education as part of our way of competing in the workforce. And we have advanced in education higher than previous counterparts. And what's kind of upsetting, but not surprising, is that this does not necessarily translate into higher salaries or more job security. And it is a variety of different reasons, but this is what the data is saying. Michael Hobbs from Huffington Post has an amazing article. I believe I have the title of it at the end of this PowerPoint, but I would suggest that you go and look at it. It is a very highly interactive article, and the website is just fantastically designed. But he says that millennials are facing the scariest financial future of any generation since the Great Depression. That's pretty depressing. We're constantly told to work harder, work harder, work harder, work harder. And when it comes to my perspective, that's something I've always done. So a little bit about me before we start talking about my perspective on success is that first, I'm not every millennial, but I am one of many. My particular background was I was born in Panama. I have a Panamanian mother and a Mexican American father both of them did not go to college. I'm the oldest of 5, and I was the first to receive a degree. But the average salary of my family growing up was anywhere from $16,000 a year to $25,000 a year. And with that comes hard work. My family, my mom and my dad are both very hard workers, and they taught that in our work ethic, me and my siblings. He said, keep your head down, work, hustle, and if you don't, you'll drown. So since he told that to me and relating to how he works, I've always thought I need to work silently and my results will speak volumes. My education is that I got all 3 degrees. I'll finish my doctorate degree in March. But I got a bachelor's in painting, master's in post-secondary and higher education, and I'm currently a doctoral candidate for leadership and innovation here at ASU. The hustle is that in my bachelor's, I was rotating between 3 jobs at any time. I worked at the Gap, Old Navy, that's my sales skill. I also worked for the foundation at ASU, asking alumni for scholarship donations. I was an office secretary. I worked at the Princeton Review. Every time I found a scholarship, I applied. I needed the money. I needed to pay for my bills because my family couldn't do that. And I also used my skill as an artist to do live paintings. The days where I couldn't make ends meet between paychecks, I would go out in the street. We have a street called Mill Avenue where all the college kids go, but I would stay hours out there and paint a painting. And I'd put my little bucket out there and people would just give me money because I needed to pay bills. So the results are something I've never thought would happen. I'm currently a senior coordinator for the online graduate programs here at Thunderbird, but I'm also a speech and debate coach. I teach high school students about argumentation, improvisation, rhetoric, philosophy, and public speaking. I paint portraits and gallery showings I have on the side as a side business. And to think about it, I've always had to be different and better. And I have to do it every single day. I had to be creative with the skills that I learned. So in this sense, improvisation was the key. I had my skills from painting, which is the creativity part of it. Painting itself is problem solving. It's a big problem to solve when you don't know how to get from point A to point B, how to make a circle turn into an apple, how to render that apple realistically. That is problem solving in a physical way. And so when I think about the fourth industrial revolution, I think all of a sudden the 4IR doesn't sound as scary as it's made out to be. So how do you prepare for the fourth industrial revolution with a fleet of millennials? Again, this is just my perspective. I'm only one of millions of millennials, but I like to dig into organizational creativity, improvisation, and adaptive leadership. Let's think of creativity on a scientific level. Zhu et al. In a study, a neurological study in 2016, said that, the study investigated the brain structure underlying individual differences in everyday creativity, which was measured by an instrument called the Creative Behavioral Inventory. There's about 163 participants, and they found that everyday creativity, time to do something creative every day, positively correlated with premotor cortex, which may be associated with novel action. And the findings also stated that the specific personal ability to have everyday creativity may therefore play an important role in facilitating an individual's creative achievement. Basically, this training and practice may increase your brain or increase changes in your brain structure. So why do we care? Like, why is creativity good? Well, I was reading a book by Josh Linkner, and I have that resource at the end of the PowerPoint. And part of it, he said, was creativity is disrupt or be disrupted. He's the author of The Road to Reinvention, How to Drive Disruption and Accelerate Transformation. And he talks about a lot of different examples on how creativity could have been used to reinvigorate the workplace. He also states that creativity is the new, most effectively sustainable competitive advantage, one thing companies cannot outsource. Two examples are Borders and Circuit City. Borders was founded in 1971, and it grew to about 1,200 stores and employed nearly 25,000 people. In 2009, the company generated nearly $3 billion in annual sales, but by 2012, it didn't exist. So what happened? One, they outsourced their online book sales to Amazon in 2001. And what could have been a core competence of the company was instead handed over to someone else. They failed to enter into the ebook market. Barnes & Noble beat them, and they were unwilling to think that digital books would be a thing. They failed to capitalize on downloading and streaming. So anything that has to do with music and with the movies, they didn't think was going to be, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm trying to read my notes. There it is. So they failed to capitalize in downloading and streaming. And these are things that other companies had worked for or were thinking of. And they were okay with the status quo. Same with Circuit City. They failed to reinvigorate their workplace or be creative with how they approached electronic sales. They didn't embrace the gaming side of electronics. And executive pay stayed up while sales plummeted. But then Josh Linkner gives us the example of Nest. And Nest is pretty interesting. Tony Fadell was the guy who led the first 18 generations of the iPod and the first 3 generations of the iPhone. And he left Apple to build thermostat. And you would think, wait, why thermostats? It just measures temperature. Well, because he had a creative eye, he saw an industry that was ready to change. His creation was Nest, and a learning thermostat, which disrupted the thermostat industry. It sold out within a week of its release in 2011, and the reinvention of the thermostat kind of gave a wake-up call to Honeywell, the juggernaut, a run for its money. Another company that's doing a lot of creativity and disruption and is using that disruption to be part of their design is Interior Architects. And I'm going to take a sip of water just because it's a lot of talking. So what Interior Architects want to do is they want to break down an establishment. They take interior design and they try to see the unconventional when it comes to something that's normal, like an office workplace. They break down the structure and kind of let the air flow through. They also be creative with disruption. They take the culture, the environment, the strategies, and encourage that within creativity. And they take the values of the company and mesh it all together to make a very functional space. They also believe that someone who is disrupted or someone who is a disruptor, think the civil rights movement or the hippie generation, they're responsive and resilient. Disruptors know that resilience is needed in the face of change. So not only are they thinking about breaking down the structures within an office space, they're also thinking about how can it be resilient and useful. Interior Architects has worked with Bacardi Barcelona in USA, McDonald's, and Humana. And their website has some really good examples. So where do we start? Well, think about interior intelligences. There's multiple intelligences in your organization, and you can use those to your advantage. Robert Kelsey, the author of The Outside Edge, Making of an Outsider, gives 8 intelligences that can be used in the workforce. Of course, we're thinking, oh, this is another in personality, I'm an ENFJ and you're an INTP. It's actually a little different. He gives you these 8 intelligences and you get to pick what intelligence you fit into. I'm not going to go through all of these for time's sake, but I think I'm going to go ahead and ask you what you think yours are. Before that, my strengths: visual. Obviously, I'm a painter, so graphs, doodles, colors, post-it notes, etc. Verbal, tones and pitch and volume. That's what I teach my kids. Interpersonal, body language, sensing moods. You go into a room and you sense, is this going to be a tense meeting or, is this going to be more relaxed? And intrapersonal. So you have reflection and self-evaluation. Did I approach this person correctly? How did I deliver this presentation, etc. So I do want to know, out of these intelligences, what do you think is your most prominent intelligence? Becca, can you? I think she can hear me, hopefully.
Yes, everyone, please type it in the chat box. What is your primary intelligence? Here we come. We've got mathematical, interpersonal, visual, kinesthetic, visual, interpersonal, mathematical. I'm seeing a lot of the same come across. Verbal.
So yeah, mathematical, yeah.
Interpersonal, visual, interpersonal. Lots of interpersonal.
That's
visual,
good.
Mathematical, kinesthetic, 1. Another mathematical, another verbal, visual, interpersonal. mathematical.
All right. Seems like we got a variety, but interpersonal sounds to be the strengths. And I think that's fantastic because interpersonal also has to talk about emotional intelligence, which is a really important skill that a lot of people are starting to grasp that is needed in the workplace. And, you know, there's also kind of labeling your intelligence gives you a little bit of intrapersonal where you start kind of reflecting, yeah, I really do have a strength in visual or kinesthetic or mathematical. So I want to talk about meshing creativity and these intelligences. Creativity can't be outsourced. We already said that, but it's important for forward thinking. And let's reflect inward to develop creativity. Use your employees rather than an outside company to use to your advantage to see what sort of creativity they can come depending on their strengths. So an example for creativity, I do want to give you an example, but before that, we also need to know that creativity needs improvisation because it builds capacity. Robert Kelsey also says that improvisation involves reworking composed material and designs into unanticipated ideas and concepts, because every time you do that and under that pressure of improving it right on the spot, you create new features to every previous creation. Netflix is a really good example. I love Netflix. Who doesn't love Netflix? It was established in 1977. It now has a market capitalization of $152.7 billion. And they went from DVDs to streaming to original content. That's a really big step. You go from competing with Blockbuster to competing with Hulu to producing with high profile directors and actors your own original content. That was a bit of a breakthrough for a place where you can rent DVDs. So now it even operates in 192 countries. I'm pretty sure, or I'm going to bet that there was a lot of on-the-spot thinking when it came to the direction that Netflix took. And I want to talk about improvisation dimensions. So me explaining this slide is up at the top. We have the degree of structure to your left and the degree of risk to the bottom. And if you think about it, it's not a steadfast rule, but the lower the degree of structure, the lower degree of risk, assuming free-form brainstorming with your coworkers. There's not that much structure because it's brainstorming, and there's not that big of risk because it's brainstorming. But if you think about airplane design and manufacturing and surgery procedures, well, airplane design, you need to know how to engineer the airplane so that it does not go down. So we have a lot of structure. There's a lot of previous designs that they need to work off of. There is physics. There is the engineering that goes into that. You need a lot of structure to construct an airplane. But there's also a high degree of risk. If you make a mistake in the math, there may be a mistake later on. Same with surgery. You want your doctor to know what they're doing, and you want them to have practiced this a lot. And you hope that there's a structured procedure somewhere to do everyday gallbladder, you take out your gallbladder, right? But there's also a degree of risk. So they always tell you before surgery, just to let you know, there might be complications and blah, blah, blah. Here are the side effects. So that's how I'm thinking of improvisation and its dimensions. Improvisation is great when it comes to a speech and debate team. And my team is composed of kids with different strengths. One student, his name is Eddie. He explained to me that he's a very logical and scientific person. And I explained to him, you know, there are 3 activities in speech and debate, and which one do you gravitate? So we have debate, which gives you high structure. You're given a certain amount of time to talk, and you have a certain way of speaking and certain things that you need to address. But it's also high improv, because after you do your first speech, you need to defend your position and also try to find contradictions on the spot of your opponent. Public speaking, on the other hand, which is oratory or extemporaneous speaking within the activities in speech and debate, has a high structure. we tell them what to do and how much they have to do it. But it has low improv because they have to make their own speech. It's a high risk though, because for example, a student doing oratory, they're going to do something very personal most of the time so that it impacts you. But it's high risk because they're being vulnerable with what the subject is. And then there's interpretation. This is humor, drama, poetry. It's literally someone going up and reading poetry to you in such a manner that it keeps you captivated. It's low structure. So you only have a certain amount of time. There's low improv because you've already memorized the piece, but it's high risk because you need to gauge where your judge is and if it's going to win. So with Eddie, I didn't think that his strength would be interpretation. After he'd done debate, he loved it. He came out of his shell and he was able to do improv real quick. But he wanted to do interpretation. And I thought, I don't know if he could do that. Nope, he proved me wrong. With the skills that he learned in debate, he ended up applying it to doing a humor piece. You know how hard it is to make people laugh? Wow. So he did a really good job. And 3 months before, he couldn't even form a sentence doing an impromptu speech without being defeated. So this is my recommendation to everyone. And this is just how I think. Take inspiration from a speech and debate team. We have an activity called impromptu. It's 7 minutes total. And I tell the students, all right, convince me why I should drink more water. And they have 7 minutes to convince me why I should drink more water. This is a type of persuasion and argumentation. Increase confidence, it enhances your style, there's a higher vocabulary if you practice this over and over, and you get creativity within argumentation. They have to create right on the spot why I should drink more water, or why I should paint my nails black, or yada yada. Same with a sales pitch. If you're on a sales team, take 10 minutes and have someone sell you something, not the product that you're selling originally, this clicker. Sell me this clicker. Because selling equals persuasion. You get employees comfortable with the idea of selling. They have a chance to create ideas and enhance their style of presentation, and it sharpens their argumentation skills. And that's just one idea. I took the ideas of the intelligences and played off the strengths of those on my team. So play out the strengths and intelligences off of your team. So we go into adaptive leadership, and for time's sake, I won't go through all of this, but I do want to talk about Valve. Valve is a rebel without a cause, and I am just so thirsty today. So rebel with a cause. Valve is an organization that Francesca Gino, author of Rebel Talent, who wrote a Harvard Business School case on Valve software. They generate games like Half-Life and Counter-Strike, and it's one of the most dominant platform for distributing PC games through something called Steam. My husband plays video games. He always talks about Steam. I still don't know what it is exactly, but it's where you distribute PC games. It's a private, self-funded firm whose per employee profitability is higher than Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. Its employees arrived at decisions through argumentation and persuasion. So when they want to make a case for a new project, a team of enough people have to start working on it. Some employees are obviously going to be better at persuading other colleagues than others, but no one has the formal power to tell anyone else what to do. And taking a small page out of interior architect's book, but not directly, they have desks that move so you can unplug and go to another team if you want to join another initiative. And they also believe that freedom is given to employees to be creative, and it liberates their employees for innovation. So they have a flatter organization. This might not work for everyone. That's definitely a reality, but it's good to look at other examples on how things are changing when it comes to the workforce. Toyota did something similar in the 1940s with a less radical approach where they gave the power over to the employees to design the assembly line. Because who knows best how to assemble a car than those who do assemble a car? And it ended up being very successful for Toyota. So rebel leadership can be adaptive. Francesca Gino, I'm still quoting her, she says that rebel leadership is not just for people who think of themselves as leaders, and you don't need staff people working under you to be a leader. And rebel organizations know their limitations, but they also know that complacency is not okay because that's the status quo. We can't become complacent. We have to start thinking about conventional societal roles and social roles and how they hinder us from innovation and unconscious biases that happen in the workplace. So the difference is that a rebel organization does not believe that there are limits to what can be accomplished. You just need to see the picture from a different angle. I'm not going to go through all of these, but she's got a really cool wheelhouse of different ways to approach rebel or adaptive leadership principles. And my favorites are these. The first one is seek out the new. That's probably the best step, is to seek out what is happening in real life, outside, stakeholders, people in your offices. Seek out the new and see what is so new about it. What is the innovation? And dissect it. Open conversations, don't close them. So when employees come up to you and say, I have this idea, don't just say, oh, that's a great idea, and then close them. You might not have time for it, but developing a culture that helps employees find value in their creativity would be an adaptive leadership. Lead from the trenches. And in her book, she just says, like, give credit to those below you and point out those who are doing the innovation at the bottom level. And then find freedom in constraints. For example, my job, I have to take into consideration not only the department's policies, but the university's policies and federal policies at the government level and state policies as well. In order for students to be successful, I need to follow all of these rules in order to have them go through their program. So I have to think of innovative ways to not only abide by these policies, but also give the student what they need and the tools that they need in order to go through their program. So here at Thunderbird, we have executive education, we have online masters, we do online, hybrid, and in-person. So, if you're interested, let's talk about how we can prepare for the 4IR through Thunderbird School of Management. And here are some of the books that I've read. Gen Y Now was Hobart and Sendick, goes over myths of millennials and other topics like the new realities of employing millennials and emotional intelligence. We have Robert Kelsey, and he talks about being an outsider who gives a new perspective and explores creativity and improvisation as important qualities that your teams should envelop. And then there's Rebel Talent. I love this picture. It just makes my day. Francesca Gino, she gives you a good reason to become a rebel. And she uses unconventionality that gives you the edge to be competitive in uncertain times. And The Road to Reinvention by Josh Linkner talks about disruption and how it could be small or large. It just takes some creativity. And to overhaul your culture, reimagine the customer, and create vivid experiences. Here's some of the references that I used. I'll be sending those out. And again, Thunderbird Executive Education and our online education, we are being different. It's great, but let's be better with you and being different at the same time. We lead into the 4IR by preparing organizations, businesses, governmental entities, and much more. And our approach to the 4IR is to take the unconventional and disruptive and turn it into something to look forward to. Let's go into unknown territory and figure out how we can develop our strengths. So now I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Gina. Yes, everyone, if you would please post your questions in the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. We did have a question come in from Mohammed. Mm-hmm. I want to know how to create a leadership in an organization.
You want to know how to create leadership or a leadership? Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Leadership in an organization.
That's a really interesting question because it depends on the angle that you approach it. So I personally think that leadership comes from people who are innovative without having people under them, just like Francesca Gino said. Being a leader doesn't mean that you have any sort of power over people. being a leader is taking part of what the goal is and showing everyone else how you do it, as well as taking into account other people's learning capacities. So I think leadership is a lot. It's a lot of emotional intelligence. It's a lot of being self-aware. It's a lot of being able to convince people, persuasion, argumentation. It's all of those put into one. And to create leadership and innovation, I think you would start with those who are really passionate and envelop those sort of ideas, but also start to kind of draw other people in. If you have a leadership committee, might be a good way to start. But if you want to develop your leadership, start thinking about the small changes you can make that kind of do a domino effect later on. I know that I've done a couple of those before.
We have a question from Carlos, who is a school principal and a T-Bird. Thanks, Carlos. Do you have ideas on teaching school-age children creativity?
I do. I mean, I work with high school students, and creativity comes in different forms. I believe through speech and debate, for example, they're being creative when it comes to how they approach their arguments. They're being creative on how to bring new ideas to the table when they're doing their oratory, or like, this is how they start to become creative in problem solving. I think that creativity, especially in kids, I'm gonna default to like something that's probably been said over and over again, but I think keeping art and keeping music and keeping those parts of education within the current curriculum, that's a dream of mine, because not only has art helped me personally be creative within my own scope, I'm able to teach others about it in different capacities. So I think that creativity is something that can be fostered in kids if they are able to create physically, crayons, Play-Doh, yada, yada, but also storytelling. How does a second grader create a story compared to a fourth grader? Or maybe take that story that they had back in second grade. How can they expand it and make it more rich? Creativity starts from something small and it kind of builds on itself. And every time you go back to it, there's like a unique feature that gets twisted, which is good. It could be good. It could be good. But that's what I would think, that to build capacity for creativity would mean to take something that's already been done and look at it from a different angle and really simplify it, especially if they're kids.
A question from Mohammed. What are the most important issues in leadership management?
I'm going to be frank. I'm going to be very frank. Well, what I've learned from my program as being a doctoral student and leadership in general and real experiences, I think that leadership management has to go towards a more holistic view. It's no longer about power. It's no longer about politics. I think it's more about self-reflection and making sure that if you're the leader, are you doing this? Get your feedback from your employees. Make that space where they can tell you this is where you need to improve. And don't take it personally, because that's what usually seems to happen. Leadership management also, you think about, there's a lot of personalities and not all of them are going to mesh. But what are the strengths that each person brings to the table, and how can you make that the show? Leadership management, and from what I've learned academically, is that there are different types, obviously democratic, adaptive, and I can't think off the top of my head right now, but I lean towards empathetic leadership, because I think that creates the strongest bond, and it creates the most open space for employees and leaders to become creative and innovative without those hierarchical twists, I guess.
We have a comment back to your previous question from Jeff. Children are naturally creative. It seems the best way to foster that is to prevent adults from shutting down their imaginations.
I agree with that so much. I totally, I agree. Every time I see my nieces or my nephews and I think about how creative they are when they tell me stories and tell me their experiences and how they grab little things and give me ideas, and everything is great. I think it's fantastic. And I think that we as adults should probably think about or check ourselves on where that creativity is being hindered when it comes to our kids learning.
Question from Alicia. How can I lead young people when I don't have motivation?
I usually don't have motivation. I am very frank. I'm a very frank person, and I'm very in tune with that. And where this is just my experience, but where my motivation comes is towards the empathetic side. If you have no motivation, that might be the first place to start. And it's not because it's a bad thing, but you also want to look at all the things that are running in the background. Do you, like a computer, have too many tabs open and that motivation gets drained? Where is your energy being spent? And if you want to lead younger people, do you think, is talking to them one-on-one something that you can do, or is talking to them as a group? Can you get to know them? If that motivation is drained by the end of the day, I think it may be something that you would need to look at through a different lens. And once you grow that motivation, I think you'd be able to lead younger people, because they do, at least from my high school students, and even the student workers that I've supervised, they're younger than me. They're Gen 2020, and they're extremely intuitive. They can sense when I'm off kilter. So maybe starting with motivation skills and highlighting how you can become motivated can bleed into how they see you, and a conversation can start there.
A question from Emery. A policy-making department where I work is in need of a creative engagement or outreach person, like myself, to reach their goals, but they don't know it yet. How can I best approach them?
You remember what my dad said? Work hard, hustle. Let's go back. My dad he doesn't make the best fiscal decisions, but he's pretty darn good at working. Where is he? There he is. Work silently and your results will speak volumes. I have worked at ASU, and I've worked at Thunderbird for about a year now, but I've worked at ASU with graduate students and graduate education for a while. And I started changing things on my own within my scope of work without asking anybody. And it wasn't controversial. These are just things and I thought needed to improve. But little after little, people started to talk about it. And I didn't advertise it. People started to notice. And so if that's from my perspective, I think that's what you should do. Just start changes, and not controversial ones, but I'm sure that creativity will start to get recognized. It took me a little while because I needed to calibrate myself a little, but I mean, change can happen. And if you're the person to do it, then you could always have that domino effect that happens where you do small innovations and applications and it leads to something better or better quality.
A question from another T-Bird, Juan Carlos. Can you apply specific creativity techniques, or do specific creativity techniques exist that could be applied to new business creation?
Yeah. So I'm a little bit biased because I'm an artist, and that's just something that I've always done. Has been a passion of mine. But I could think and say that I have taught others about how the watching of someone actually drawing and painting, I get feedback from those who I've been with that don't paint. And then I start seeing that they say, oh, it's like, they start reflecting on it. They give me a situation that's completely outside of artwork. At work today, I did this, and it just reminded me of the time where you kind of fixed the shadow on the apple when you taught me how to draw that apple. And that technique just kind of resonated into work. So you might want to think a little outside the box. I'm not sure, but in this case, my recommendation is literally take creative tools, and in a new business environment, when you have a blank piece of paper and you don't have art skills, the first thing to do is just be creative. Creativity doesn't have a start and a stop. It is literally something that just happens. So the more you expose yourself to creative techniques, either literally creative techniques or through books like Francesca Gino's Rebel Talent, the more it starts to become part of you and part of the work and part of the organization. Like, for example, I do graphic design now for some of the marketing, and it's fun, but it's a lot of problem solving. And it's not, like it strengthens the new business.
A follow-up from Juan Carlos. Do you have examples of creative techniques?
I might have to get back to you on that, because my creative techniques are literal creative techniques. And that comes from my formal art background. I would have to think about that. If you're okay, just leave me your email and we can talk a little more.
Another question from Mohammed. What are the differences between management and leadership in terms of creativity?
Think about it this way. Leadership sounds really sparkly, and management sounds like management, but both of them go hand in hand. If you think about management, kind of flows into leadership and leadership flows into management. They are one in one. Management gives you the structure. The structure meaning this is what you do day to day. What are the processes you have to create to be efficient and effective at communicating? Management is managing other people and knowing what they do. Leadership gives you a little more wiggle room to emphasize your strengths, whether it would be your mathematical background or your intrapersonal background, your visual background. Leadership gives you a chance to show those who, I hate saying work for you, but those who are part of your team, that these are my strengths and this is how I approach problem solving. I hope that this might inspire you to do that too. Or how do you? It starts that circle conversation of feedback. And I feel like management is more just structure, and leadership gives that depth that is needed.
Thank you, Gina. We have a question from Minnie. Thank you for sharing so much about yourself. It definitely debunks some of the misconceptions that are out there about millennials. You mentioned your family background. How proud are they of your accomplishments?
They are wondering where I came from, because they're like, what? Where did you, why, what? Yeah, they're great. They're proud. They're been always my support team. Even when I was in my painting, my bachelor's, like they didn't ever say like, why are you doing that? Why aren't you going to become a lawyer or something? And I'm kind of happy that they didn't do that, because they really believe, at least they put it up front about it, that I would be successful with it. So I'm really happy.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Gina Delgado, for speaking with us. We do have one last question from Lipsa. How do you bring innovation in teaching style in business? Do you have any examples in real life that you like that improved learning?
Authenticity. When I enter a room, and this is just from previous teaching that I've done, I instantly try to connect with those in the room and what they're going to learn. I try to be myself, because if I'm not myself, I start stuttering. I start getting upset. I start figuring, oh, they don't like me. I need to be myself. And that is an innovation in and of itself, because we always think, okay, when you're going to do a presentation, you have to be, and that just doesn't work for me. It may be an innovation for some, it may not be, but my opinion is the technique to teach is the technique to connect. And I'm a human, you're a human. We're talking about something that we need to improve, or we're talking about something that you need to learn. So let's talk like a group. Let's talk like we know each other. Let's take that boundary out. And I think that becomes more effective, especially with my kids. They were really scared of going up there and just talking to me. But once I opened up the whole year going, hey, what's your name? What's going on? It seemed to roll a lot easier for them. And removing those barriers has been effective for me. So I would say that that's my example.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. We hope to see you at our next webinar.